Good morning, good day, or good evening, depending on when you're listening throughout the day. And welcome to our second episode of the Not So Silent Film Podcast with me, Samal.
I'm Antonio.
And me, Rosie.
Whoop whoop.
Ooh.
So last time we looked at romance with a focus on three films that have heterosexual romance at the core of them. So, as Sam has put this when we were talking about this, he thought that it would be a good palate cleanser that this week we focus on something else. Now, we thought we'd do queer representation in cinema, but we quickly realized that that was a heavy theme to pack into three representative films. So instead, we decided to focus on different aspects of the LGBTQIA plus spectrum in different episodes. With this episode representing a focus on male homosexuality and representations of such in cinema. Now, we also wanted to kind of avoid the trope of going for the classic, the standard coming out picture and, the coming of age, coming out narrative. So these three films that we have chosen try and avoid that as much as possible.
Or at the very least, have a bit of a unique spin on it.
At the very least, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
It's worth noting that the reason we chose films that don't revolve around coming out is because it's actually harder than you think, and we want to think of homosexual characters in terms of actually speaking back to a context of art and culture, as opposed to just speaking back to the context of coming out and of the necessity of coming out. And it's all about basically normalizing that you don't have to normalize coming out at this point.
I also just want to say that it is important to discuss or to have coming out representation in queer cinema.
Absolutely.
Because that is sadly the reality we live in, that is a very big part of most queer people's lives. But for this specific episode, we just wanted to look a bit further ahead and see what else there was.
There is more to the queer experience than just the coming out story arc. And I think that that's what we wanted to portray here and look into here, because at this point it has been done to death. Mm-hmm. Is it an important part? Sure. Is it the only part? Not nearly.
Exactly.
And I'm sure we'll also explore stories about coming out. I'm sure that will be an episode for us. But yeah, we wanted to start with something a bit more progressive.
So the film I picked for this week's discussion is Alfred Hitchcock's 1948 Rope.
And my pick for this episode is Stranger by the Lake from 2013, directed by Alain Guiraudie.
And this episode, I have chosen the Brazilian film The Way He Looks from 2014, directed by Daniel Ribeiro. I apologize for my English accent.
And yeah, I also probably butchered the director's name with my pick. But
hey.
I did,
but
because it's Alfred fucking Hitchcock, so at least I know how to say that.
Yeah, but you don't get a point for that.
It's not adventurous.
If anything, minus a point.
Yeah. So my pick for this week is Alfred Hitchcock's 1948 film Rope, which is about two queer guys who murder one of their colleagues, throw him in a chest, and then throw a dinner party on top of the chest without the guests realizing that he is either dead or there, really. So what did you guys think of Rope?
I want to start off by saying that I thought this film was fucking fantastic.
Did you really?
I love this film. I thought structurally it was so expertly crafted in terms of how it tried to build up tension. I felt really nervous towards the end.
I really enjoyed it too. I thought I felt the same in the sense that I didn't know whether they were going to get caught or not. Also, can I just say though, the first scene when they strangle him had me dying. How he dies, it was just like he just didn't. Oh, but no, I really, really enjoyed it. It was very, I felt it was very tense in the sense there was just one shot that sticks out in my mind where it's the chest and then I've forgotten her name, the maid lady.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, she comes back and she's like clearing the chest and then goes to open it, and it did a very good job of like keeping you on your toes, because I was like, he's in there the whole time and you're all being fooled.
It's very interesting
Absolutely.
because that shot is so long, and it's just her like clearing off the table and going to the kitchen and coming back, but you're sitting there like, it's happening, it's happening, it's
Because
happening.
you know what it's building up to, you know?
Yeah.
I feel just exactly like you guys said, it's masterfully crafted, but it is also incredible in terms of representation, with homosexuality being such a taboo in the 1940s, and, you know, being basically any expression of that being suppressed by the Hays Code. I find it so interesting that such a strong portrayal of a homosexual couple could make it to the screen, especially well, I mean, probably it does have something to do with the fact that Alfred Hitchcock was a huge director even in the 40s. So I think he did have a lot more leeway in choosing his topic and in representing that on the screen. But it is such an out of character film for that period. But and that's not only because of the representation, that's also structurally, as you said, because of its prevalence towards long takes, and it's kind of like attempt to portray the action in real time. Although critically, it has been kind of scrutinized that a sunset would normally take longer than portrayed in the film, and that the film actually takes place in 80 minutes, whereas the action kind of takes place in 100 minutes, if that makes sense, like temporally. But again, structurally, it is one of the most insane experiments with cinematography ever done up to that point, and ever done since.
What did you guys think of the sort of philosophy that was brought out throughout the film around superior intellectual beings and inferior intellectual beings who didn't deserve to live?
I thought it was really interesting, but no, I when they were talking, to be honest, a lot of it I just thought how like I've forgotten his name, Brandon.
Yeah.
Yes.
His name Brandon? Yeah, he came across really like sociopathic.
Definitely. I think a very interesting parallel is being made. And I will just say, I'm glad you brought up the philosophical aspect, because you wouldn't really get this in a normal queer film nowadays, you know? So this is, again, why I think Rope is so good, because it brings forward not only gay people, but gay people in these philosophical questions, you know? So it really makes gay people and queer people part of the broader philosophical and artistic discourse. And I think that's very important, and a lot of films still lack on that. But I think a very interesting parallel is made between, so Brandon talks a lot about Nietzsche's philosophical concept surrounding the Übermensch. So that's like the superhuman, let's say, you know, the one who's superior to all. And the superhuman concept was actually, when it was coined by Nietzsche, it didn't really come so it was only meant to theorize, because evolution hasn't stopped. It was only meant to theorize what people could achieve years later. It wasn't meant, so the superhuman, according to Nietzsche, is neither slave nor master, you know? So there should be no inferiority or superiority. But over the years, especially after Nietzsche's death, it kind of got misconstrued, and it got altered, specifically through anti-Semitism and through the Nazi Party, because they needed an ideology. So that's where kind of like that inferiority and that superiority of the superhuman came, because the Nazis needed an ideology in order to segregate people based on races, and in order to build kind of like a super race, you know, the superhuman. So I think that the comparison that is very interesting here is that when Brandon is in one of his full-blown monologues surrounding the Übermensch, James Stewart's character warns him that he sounds a bit like Hitler.
Yeah.
You know? Or was it James Stewart's character, or was it Philip? I can't really remember, unfortunately.
It's the father, no? Who says that?
Oh, it was Mr. Kentley.
Yeah,
right. It was David's dad. True. But then Brandon says that he kind of like denigrates Hitler as having been this paranoid fanatic, I believe.
Yeah. Savage.
And I thought it's so interesting because by the end, both of them are exactly that, especially Brandon turns into a paranoid savage or paranoid fanatic, very much the same vein. So that kind of like works in order to make a mockery of anti-Semitism and of Nazis as a whole, which was very prevalent in American cinema during during World War II and after World War II. So a very strong anti-Nazi sentiment.
I have a quick question, and this, tell me if this is me just being super duper dumb, but were they outright gay, the main two?
I actually wanted
or was
to comment.
that more hinted?
I actually wanted to comment on that because I thought that was really interesting, because the minute I started watching it, I immediately got that they were gay. Like, it wasn't even a question to me. And then I went on to IMDb afterwards to like look up what people were actually, like, whatever reviews were on there. And one of the frequently asked questions were they really gay? And I'm like,
so my thing was, I wrote down like, I saw loads of text retention, but I didn't know if they were, I didn't know whether they were like outright gay or whether it was more like subtleties in what they were saying to each other and how they were acting with each other. Because I definitely got that there was like something there. Do you know what I mean?
So let me just tell you, obviously subtlety is the only way this theme could have been approached at the time. So most queer representation of the time is subtext, and that's all you kind of get as a gay viewer looking for representation. Unfortunately, from that era is mostly subtext because you couldn't represent anything else. But looking at the facts, it's actually a lot more obvious than a lot of other films that have queer representation, because they live in the same apartment in New York. They're well-to-do. They literally live together, do everything together. It is said that Philip is going to stay with Brandon's mother to practice piano. That's already an indicator. The maid that they have acknowledges several times that they live together, that they stay together, that they do everything together, kind of their companionship, if you will.
Yeah.
And there are also all of the innuendos. There is this sentence that they literally say, "Shame we couldn't do it with the curtains open in broad sunlight, but at least we did it during the day." That is one of those clear comparisons between murder and sex that Alfred Hitchcock does, and that just goes to showcase that this murder is basically a metaphor for the homosexual union of Brandon and Philip. They are very they're put in there on purpose, because the film is based on a play, which in turn is based on an actual murder case, the Leopold and Loeb case, where two criminals, both gay, murdered a child, a 4-year-old child, I think, in search of the perfect crime.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it is very dark.
Oh my God.
And the play itself was written by a gay man, so any innuendo between the two is very much on purpose, because not only are the real people that it was based on gay or were gay, the screenwriter, the playwright was also gay, and the stars themselves were gay. So John Dahl was homosexual and Farley Granger was bisexual. The one who plays Philip was bisexual and the one who plays Brandon was homosexual.
No, I was just going to say, I think because as well, when I went into it, like not looking anything up from it, if that makes sense. And I kind of thought, because it's the 40s, they wouldn't in that time have put two gay men on screen having a major story. Do you know what I mean? So yes. I think I went into it with more that perspective, but actually now you say all that, it's quite clear.
One thing that really, because obviously, like we said, what we strive to do here is pick a topic, pick male homosexuality as a topic, but pick films that don't revolve around the coming out experience or around kind of like that don't make homosexuality into the boogeyman that needs to be addressed all the time, you know?
Yeah.
And this is what I think Rope does a lot better than a lot of recent films even, is because it showcases, not only does it showcase two openly gay characters, because mind you, everyone around them knows that they're gay and they accept them just as they are. There's no need for them to come out. You know, this is just something that is. So not a lot of films kind of like do that even today, where they just kind of like show these characters who are murderers. One's a pianist, one's I don't even know what he does, but he's a postgraduate student because it never gets elaborated. He's just a socialite, let's say. So he lives well, has money, the dream, you know? But they just happen to be gay. That's not like the main point of the action. So it's not that like that homosexual people have to be good, you know? It's not that like everyone is just like this easy coming out thing with affection, with love. No, here you have two gay characters who are main characters and who can be evil and who are complex, you know? It's not just like, oh, are they good or are they evil? One of them is a narcissistic egomaniac who manipulates the other into kind of like murdering for him. It showcases an abusive homosexual relationship. It doesn't shy away from the fact that homosexual people are just, you know, just the same people as like heterosexual people, and they can have the same complexity in a relationship. It's not always that, oh, I realized I'm gay, I like this boy, I have to come out, I will live happily ever after with this boy, or I will die trying. It's none of that. It's just showing them as these complex characters that they are.
So my pick for this episode is Stranger by the Lake, directed by, and I'm probably going to butcher this, Alain Giroudi. And it's about Frank, a regular at an undisclosed lake somewhere in France, in which men go to get naked and swim, or go to the woods nearby to go cruising. Frank becomes infatuated with another man there, another regular, if you will, Michel. However, one evening, he accidentally witnesses his crush committing a crime, and what follows is Frank's efforts to navigate what is ethically right and his intense feelings for this man. Now, before we start discussing the film, I would like to put out a little bit of a disclaimer to anyone listening, and that is that this film is very sexually graphic in nature. There is a whole lot of nudity in this film, a whole lot of penises. And whenever there is a sex scene, that is also very explicit in nature. And so that's actually where I kind of wanted to start the discussion. The excessive, and I use that in quotations, excessive nudity in the film. What did you guys think about it? Or just as a whole, what did you guys think of the film? I haven't even asked you that. I should ask that first.
I really enjoyed it. It's not what I thought it'd be at all. Not at all. I feel like I say that about every film, but it's not. I tell you what, though, you told me a couple of days before I watched it not to watch it with my mum. And I was watching it the first kind of like, I will say about 3 minutes. I was like, this isn't bad. Like, why shouldn't I watch it with mum? And then from 8 minutes onwards, I was like, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to watch it with that. But no, I thought it was really good. I wasn't expecting the murder element at all. I don't really know what I was expecting from the film, but it wasn't what it was. But I really enjoyed it. I felt like it was a really good, tense film, and I didn't know where it was going to go.
I have to disagree a bit, and
Ooh.
I am sorry to potentially shit on your film, Sam.
That's completely fine.
I didn't really enjoy it. I thought it lacked substance. I thought it lacked depth. I thought it was very shallow in a lot of places. I didn't think it went anywhere narratively. I didn't think it went anywhere aesthetically, anywhere new. It didn't really, not even anywhere new. It didn't go anywhere at all aesthetically. It was just the lake. The shots of the lake were beautiful. The shots of the parking lot and the cars, the same cars switching direction, kind of to show the regularity of the same characters that visit the cruising spot, was a nice touch. But it wasn't taken any further. It wasn't really exploring anything other than casual sex and the intimacy issues that lie at the heart of the gay community, which is a good thing to explore. But I do think it should be underpinned by a stronger narrative solution. And you both know my feelings towards the necessary and aesthetics as well. So I don't think the film was strong in either one of those regards. And I do think its only character that was actually strong, its only character that actually wasn't shallow, was the straight guy, Henri.
The quote unquote straight guy.
Obviously, the questioning, the intimately challenged, I would also be interested in saying, Henri. I think he was the character that had the most depth to him, whereas I believe Frank, or Frank, whatever you want to call him, I think he represents a very typical type of cruising homosexual. You know what I mean? I don't think he represents a fully fledged character, but he rather represents a stereotype. Whereas Michelle also represents a stereotype, that of a killer. He's not really given a motive for what he's doing. We're not really given anything to work with either one of these two characters. The only character where we know something is Henri.
Actually, I don't disagree with you in terms of the depth of the characters. That's completely true. But I also did think as well, and this also might be a bit shallow, I guess, but I did think of the sort of the bodies that were represented by the lake as well, because the two of them are, by beauty standards, the most conventionally attractive guys there. The other guys have more, I keep saying quote unquote, but quote unquote normal bodies there, right? And they're more so cast to the side as extras, but then in fact we actually do get a character that is a lot more fleshed out.
Definitely. I actually wrote this in one of my notes, and I quote, the forest functions as a catalog of meat on display. It literally works as a catalog of different body types, of different personalities, if you will, because they do shine through their clothing options or lack of clothing options, or sexual positions that they explore, or something else that happens in the background. I do believe the forest is very fully fleshed. It's fully fleshed out. It showcases difference. It showcases variety. With that being said, like you said, it's like you also mentioned, it's very shallow in the sense that we never get to explore those characters. They are just there for kind of like landscape purposes, really. And the characters that do get explored on or explored upon are the most conventionally attractive characters in the main roles. Henri obviously is the exception here.
I and again, tell me if you disagree, but I kind of thought though that it felt more like a snapshot of this Frank's life. So it was just like a bit, so you didn't need to know like all these people because he didn't know them. Do you know what I mean? So for me, it felt more like you were seeing this part, because how it ended as well, it was just like, okay, we're starting here, you're seeing this little segment of his life, stop. Do you know what I mean?
That is very true. That is very true. And I understand this tendency to bring everything towards kind of like normality, or kind of like regularity, and be like, these aren't super people, these aren't grand narratives, these are just people, and this is, like you said, a snapshot of their life that we're getting. And that's that. I understand completely where that decision came from. I still hate the character choices that were made with the main characters. I think they were not fleshed out, period.
I do want to expand a little bit upon what you said about meat on display in the woods, because that kind of segues us into the nudity. And I want to ask you what you thought about the excessive nudity in the film.
I gasped because I was like, oh my God, hold on, is it not fake? Hold a minute. And then later on, again, I was like, oh, okay, so it's not fake. I was like, I'm so lost.
You're like, oh my God.
Oh my God. Oh, there's two men. It's interesting because this is a question I wrote when I was writing the notes, because recently I've been talking to quite a few people about sex in films, and about like, not whether it's needed, because I think it doesn't matter. Do you know what I mean? If you want to put a sex scene in there, fucking put a sex scene in there. Whereas with this, I thought it was needed. I mean, there was a lot of nudity, but also personally, I thought you kind of ended up, at first I was like, oh my goodness. But then when you kind of keep watching it, you get numb to it. So it's like,
maybe this film was sort of trying to explore how, when you are encapsulated in this world that is so heavily focused on sex, which, at the heart of it, like you said, Antonio, might come from intimacy issues. Maybe there is like an excessive need to maybe search for, I don't want to say validation, but at the very least sexual pleasure in this way. and it's easy to then let that become your whole world. So then as spectators, and consequently also voyeurs of what takes place on screen as well, like you said, Rosie, we become very desensitized to the naked male body. It almost felt weirder when they were clothed. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But when they got naked, it wasn't like getting naked for the sake of it. Do you know what I mean? It kind of, it felt like it had purpose. So therefore it didn't feel unnecessary to me. Do you know what I mean?
But then I want to ask the question, like, does it have to have a purpose every time there is nudity in film?
So this is a very good question, I feel, because obviously I think socially we have such an aversion to nude bodies that kind of stems from sexual repression. It stems especially in recent years from the nuclear family that got perpetrated by the American mythology, that then kind of like had to, not only by the American mythology, obviously worldwide, that has taken a stance because of Christianity, because of religion, because of modesty and standards of modesty and all of that. And we have become very sensitive to the naked body. So I do think this film and films like this, where kind of unsimulated sex does happen, brings a very interesting question to light. And that is this really that immoral and absurd? It is just our bodies. It shouldn't really be treated with that much. It shouldn't be treated as taboo. It shouldn't be treated with that much outrage. With that being said, too many sex scenes and too many, especially with graphic sex scenes that take a while, they stagnate the action quite a bit. So whether or not its purpose, it has to be socially, I think sex scenes inherently have a purpose socially, but narratively, I don't think there should be an excess. And I do believe there is a time and a place for a sex scene. And I do believe that some of the sex scenes in Stranger by the Lake were unnecessary in that case, because they did take away from the action, and they did take away from the development of the action into kind of a more scandalous dimension.
Also, there's quite a lot of focus on Henri's his character and sort of maybe what he represents, which is essentially up to the spectator to like interpret themselves. But you could essentially make him out to be a sort of a character that has an aversion to what the other guys on the beach are doing, but at the same time
an outsider.
Yeah, but also feels maybe that he has to, because then by the end of the film, which, spoiler alert, it is revealed that he has been suicidal throughout the entire film.
Yeah.
So where does that come from? Does it come from his separation from his wife? Does it come from his repression? Does it come from what? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And his attempt at assimilating that is just not working. Something I thought was very interesting in terms of his character and his relationship with Frank was the fact that they did discuss that they were in love with each other, but it wasn't sexual in the slightest.
I think Henri, in that moment you're talking about, had one of the best quotes in the entire film, and it went something along the lines of, "You shouldn't have to fuck someone to sleep next to them."
No, right.
I thought Henri was butchered it. Was a really interesting character, because I think he was kind of the only one who wasn't sexual, wasn't sexually explicit, and I felt myself gravitating with him slightly more, not because he wasn't sexual, but just because he spoke a lot more. But do you know what I mean? You got to know him, and like with that, you knew that he wants something deeper. And even like how he said he sat on that side because he's not involved in that. He's not involved beyond the trees or something. He's not. Was it called cruising? I've never heard of it.
Have you never heard of cruising?
Really?
Never heard of cruising.
Rosie,
Unless
you've been friends with us
cruising
for
for a
this long?
bruising. Sorry. Do you know what I thought until this conversation?
What?
So before this conversation, I was like, oh my God, no women, zero, zilch, not even a drop of a woman, nothing. I was like, it's shambles. And then I was like, Rosie, it's about gay men. Come on now, darling. Fair enough. And lastly, the film I chose to look at is a Brazilian film called The Way He Looks, directed by Daniel Ribeiro. Might be pronounced wrong, but here we go, I tried. And I'm going to give you the synopsis that they give on IMDb, which is Leonardo is a blind teenager searching for independence, his everyday life, the relationship with his best friend Giovanna, and the way he sees the world changes completely with the arrival of Gabrielle. I think it's a really sweet movie. I really, really enjoy it. I have only seen it 3 times, I want to say, but I really like it. What were your guys' thoughts? Let me know.
You've seen it 3 times. Oh, wow.
Yes. I think so. I saw it once with Sam. Was that the first time we saw it together?
No.
We've watched it together, haven't we?
No.
Oh, hey, okay. That's the end of the podcast. Thanks so much for joining in.
Oh, that was good.
No, sorry. So go on. What are your guys' thoughts?
Overall, I do think this is a very sweet film that does some very interesting things in terms of its representation of his sexuality, because I don't think it's ever actually established whether or not he's gay. Rather, it is established that he is maybe a bit more fluid with his sexuality. However, I do want to note that this is a film that has that sort of coming of age, coming out storyline, but it does differ a little bit. At the same time, it feels quite unique in its way, because the focus is not so much on his sexuality, but rather on his blindness.
That's where I thought. That's where I really like it, because I thought it wasn't solely focusing on the fact that he was coming to terms with loving Gabrielle, but it was more. It was about loads of things. It was more. I thought it was more about his relationship with his best friend Giovanna.
For sure.
Which was super interesting. Sorry, Antonio, what do you think?
I liked it a lot more than Stranger by the Lake. Sorry, Sam.
That's completely okay.
Whilst I will say that, again, aesthetically, it is not exactly my cup of tea. And whilst I do think maybe, again, could have been zhuzhed up a little, I don't mind it in this case. I don't mind it. I don't believe that is the point. I believe it makes its point. It makes its points quite eloquently. I do believe this is a film that takes representation of something which we rarely see in queer culture, especially coming down from Stranger by the Lake, which was focused on how facetious the gay world is, kind of like that. So this film is very much a change. Whilst Stranger by the Lake focuses on different bodies, this focuses on differently abled persons, you know. And I feel like this is very interesting and important, an important conversation that the film brings to light. It is a completely different take on sexuality, because, like you said, it is never established whether or not he's gay per se, or whether his sexuality is fluctuating or anything like that. Because blind people, obviously, they can't. It's not the same factors that this sexuality and sexual attraction is judged by when you don't have the visual aspect, you know. So obviously, it is different things. It is the vocal timbre, it is the personality, it is the connection that you have on a deeper level where appearance is not necessarily concerned. And I think that brings the whole topic of sexuality into a completely different dimension that we don't really analyze that often, because we are a very appearance-centered society, you know. So I did quite like what it was bringing forward.
And also on that, I think in terms of representation too, I think it was very interesting that once Leo has come to terms with his infatuation with Gabriel, he isn't insecure about it at all, but rather just explains to Giovanna that he's in love, or she asks what kind of in love. He's like boyfriend in love with him, and that's about it. And then the film takes around like 5 minutes for the character to come around to it, and then that's about it. There's no major fuss really made about it.
I liked that in this, again, you guys can agree, disagree, whatever, but I thought it was nice because the relationship between Leo and Gabrielle seemed to come across really naturally. It wasn't like a usual coming of age teen film where I feel like they get together, fight together again kind of thing. It just all happened really naturally. It started as friends, and then it felt more like real.
I actually thought too, in terms of the characters and their sort of relationship and how they related to one another. I thought it was really interesting to note that the major conflict between Giovanna and Leo was that was extremely childish. Was it just me? It was like it was, and I thought that was perfect for the sort of tone that the film was setting, because this is about teenagers. And the conflict was so stupid. You didn't invite her to the cinema. You didn't. You thought she was going to stay at the library, so you left without her. She got mad. Like, that's such a typical little thing that obviously indicates a larger issue of feeling excluded from a group. But at the same time, those are the type of things that do upset us as teenagers. And that's also why I think a lot of the things that happened between him and Gabrielle also came across very natural, because it has that sort of childlike. Could you use the word juvenile in this sense?
Yes.
Yeah, juvenile essence about it.
The bullying. Oh my God. And I know, Sam, you wanted to touch on it, but that just, it was like, you don't do that to a person in general, but like at the party, when they tried to get this, for the viewers, the premise of the scene is that he's at his first party, Leo's at his first party, and the bullies play spin the bottle and make him about to kiss a dog instead of kissing a person. And it's like the bullying drove me mad.
That's also something that I really appreciated about the film, was that any of the sort of disadvantages that Leo experiences because of his blindness never come from himself. You know what I mean? Throughout the film, there's one point where the parents are worried sick because they think he might be lost because he was supposed to go to his grandma's, but then he just comes home and it's like, what's the big deal? I just went for a walk. And it's always the other characters that sort of put this disadvantage onto him, that say that you can't be independent, you can't be by yourself, sort of thing. And that also comes very well through through the characters that bully him.
He is very refreshing to see, in the sense of having such a strong lead, in a sense of having a lead that has been, obviously he has been living with this his entire life, as we find out. He was born this way, but there is not one moment where he feels to be a victim of anything. You know, there is not one moment of weakness in him, whereas the characters around him permanently showcase that kind of paternal or parental guidance over him, even though he is coming of age, literally, and he should be decisions himself as any other kid would. You know, it's just because of the deficit that this perceived deficit that others around him kind of feel the need to baby him. You know, it is very powerful in terms of that, especially when he talks about him wanting to go on an exchange program by himself. Did his homework, knows exactly where to go, who to call, all of that. Why shouldn't he? You know, debate around that, around possession of people.
I was trying to think, because this is obviously a quite unique coming of age story in that sense that it focuses more on the blindness side rather than him being gay. But do you think that this film is making those two conflicts somehow interchangeable? Like, not to indicate that the two struggles are similar in experience, but rather in an attempt to explore how both of these issues relate to a character coming of age, like independence or emancipation and all that sort of stuff.
I do think these two coexist and, in a sense, are interchangeable, in the sense of the fact that he's not victimizing himself for either one of these. There's not one like huge conflict within him. He doesn't victimize himself in face of his blindness or in face of his sexuality. It's just these two exist, and he accepts that within him. I think that's a very powerful statement and a very powerful attitude to have, especially at such a young age, you know? Are they interchangeable metaphorically? I'm not sure. I believe it would be ableist of me to say that they are, because it would be ableist of me to equate blindness with homosexuality and like the entrapments that happen between the two, because they're they're most definitely not the same. It's like when Lady Gaga says life is prison, or fame is prison, and people are like, no, prison is prison, girl. You know, something like that. Very that situation.
I agree.
I wanted to also ask what your guys' thoughts were to how the relationship between Leo and Gabrielle blossomed, as in what you thought about that. So I said I thought it was very natural, and I thought it was really sweet and everything. I was just wondering if you guys agreed with that, if you thought it was too light, if it was too. What did you guys think?
I actually thought for all the sweetness it had some grip to it, in the sense, especially when Gabrielle is first coming to terms with the fact, as again, other characters have to come to term with the fact that Leo is blind, not Leo, you know? He has to come to term, and he's like, oh, let's go see a movie. Oh, let's go see the eclipse. Oh, I swear I'll get used to it, I believe is what he says at some point.
Yeah.
And that is interesting to see, because it is not something that you're used to on a daily basis, but it's great to see it. It's kind of a model for how things should be, in the sense of acceptance, you know, in the sense of that, not and that stands obviously in opposition to the bullies who are just making fun of him for that, and for his perceived homosexuality in the end as well.
That's something that I thought the end, although slightly cringy, at the end I thought that was really nice, that the moment where they held hands and then he flipped them off.
Oh yeah.
Slightly cringy, I was like, that's a nice tying it, just like.
It's definitely, I definitely saw the use in that as a statement. However, I do agree with you. Instead of cringy, I would rather use cheesy in this scenario, because that's exactly what it was. So generic that I was like, well, it can't end this way. And then thankfully it actually ends with him riding a bike. So it doesn't.
Yeah.
You know? And that has something to do with what he says earlier in the film, when he tries to teach Gabrielle Braille. And Gabrielle says, this is impossible. And Leo says, no, what would be impossible is for me to ride a bike. Yeah. And then they take up that thing in the end, that no, it's not really impossible.
Yeah.
You can't do it by yourself, but you can do it, you know?
Yeah.
And it speaks back to the whole thing of chosen family that is brought up so often in the gay community, because he himself has such a strong chosen family with Giovanna and now with Gabrielle. If you can't do it by yourself, don't fret. There are other people for you out there to help you. You don't have to be an island, you know?
Yeah.
I also have a few things that I would love to bring in about the film. One of them is the pun of the title. Did you guys realize the way he looks? Okay, well, in that case, I'm not even gonna. What's the point?
No, go on, still bring it in.
Fuck it.
We're like, yeah, we knew that.
I think that's adorable. The way he sees the world.
The way he looks, it is the way he sees the world, but it is also the fact that when he kisses Gabrielle for the first time, that is when he actually realizes what he looks like, because it is in the touch. It is in the touch of the face and the analysis of the face.
I thought it was a really wholesome film, and I think it's one of those teen films that isn't The Kissing Booth, in the sense that it's like a genuinely good teen coming of age story.
And it also feels quite useful. Do you know what I mean? Like it's a film that teenagers can see and it actually be quite useful.
Yeah, exactly. And that is the end of this episode on I was about to say on homos. On homosexuality, male homosexuality. That's what I meant to say.
That is very funny. Oh my god, I kind of want to use that.
No, wait, let me do it again properly. So that's the end of our podcast. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. We hope to see you again. If you have any comments, anything you'd like to say to us, or what you'd want to say, anything, reach us at the Not So Silent Film Podcast Instagram. You can also keep up with what films we'll be watching in the next episode, so you can watch along too. Thank you for joining, and hopefully see you again soon.
Thank you.